The 2022 Formula 1 season has come to a close, so today I'm going to go through my top 3 drivers from this season and give you my thoughts on how their season went. So in third, I'm going to go with George Russell. George Russell has been majorly impressive for me this season, to be honest. He's gone into a new team, fighting at the front of the grid, or properly fighting with other cars for arguably the first time in his Formula 1 career, and going up against a 7-time world champion, and he beat him. Now, I know people will say Lewis was unlucky at times, which he was. I think a lot of safety cars, particularly in the early part of the season, went against him. But it's still Lewis Hamilton, and as well as that, I know Lewis was being used as a bit of a test mule for that car when it wasn't doing well at the start of the season, and he probably showed a bit more pace as the season went on and the car got better than George did. But ultimately, Mercedes had one pole, one sprint race win, and one race win this season, and George Russell got all of them. He finished ahead of Lewis Hamilton on points and managed to finish 4th in the driver's standings, ahead of even Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari. When you consider the pace advantage that Ferrari had over the Mercedes at the beginning of the season, that is pretty impressive stuff from George Russell. I think he'll go from strength to strength next season. The second driver that I have, or second most impressive driver that I have this season, is Lando Norris. I think a lot of people probably would say the same about Lando Norris. His consistency across the season has been incredibly impressive throughout. I think at this stage he probably hates being called best of the rest, but that's kind of where he is at the minute. A bit like kind of Nico Hülkenberg was a couple of years ago, but obviously he's got his podiums and he's probably been more impressive, but he's consistently just thereabouts outside the points. He was basically fighting the Alpines on his own this season, and unfortunately for him this time it didn't quite work out for him. But some of the drives that he put in this season, a lot of them went under the radar, because the problem you have when there is 3 teams that are clear at the front, the amount of shock podiums that we got over the last kind of 2 years was never going to happen this season. Because you effectively need 4 out of the 6 drivers in the top 3 teams to have either an absolute shocker or some sort of reliability problems. So the fact that he was the only driver outside of those top 6 drivers that managed to get on the podium this season kind of shows where he's been consistency wise. McLaren need to up their game in the coming seasons to keep a hold of him, because he can't be in a car that's dawdling around the midfield for the next couple of years. He is showing that he deserves to be in the fight, at least with the guys in the top teams. He's always been thereabouts when he was up against Carlos Sainz, when he was up against George Russell in junior categories. He can more than hang with those drivers, so he needs to be given the machinery that allows him to do that. Will McLaren be able to do that? I'm not 100% sure. I think that Mercedes may be lining him up for when Lewis Hamilton decides to retire. So if McLaren want to keep a hold of him long term, they're going to need to up their game massively over the coming seasons. And finally then, the number 1 spot on this list can only go to one person. It's Max Verstappen. I've talked about Max Verstappen on this channel a couple of times now, and that you kind of end up running out of words to describe the consistency that he's shown over the last 2 years in particular. Barely put a foot wrong all season. There's very few instances you can point to and say that he's had a shocker. I think Singapore wasn't great. He had a bit of a tough time at Singapore. Brazil as well, probably, but outside of that, he's barely put a foot wrong. Most, I think it was 15 wins this season, which is the most in a Formula 1 season. Lots of podiums, huge amount of points. I think it's like nearly 150, or maybe even more than 150 points back to Charles Leclerc in second. And when you consider he was over 40 points behind Leclerc after the first 3 races, for him to come back and just utterly dominate this season the way he has is incredibly impressive. And the scary thing for the opposition, the Mercedes and the Ferraris of this world, if Red Bull keep giving him a car over the next 3 or 4 years that can compete for the title, I don't see how you stop him. I think he's the most complete driver on the grid in terms of just sheer pace. He barely seems to put a foot wrong. He's unemotional, just relentless. He's got blistering pace in qualifying, and he's just a master of consistency during the race. So, unless his motivation goes down the toilet or Red Bull don't provide him with a car capable of challenging, which I struggle to see happening over the next couple of years, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to stop him wrapping up the next couple of titles. But those are my top 3 drivers for this season. If you think differently, if one of your favourite drivers or your most impressive drivers deserves a spot on that list, by all means let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.